Greetings, my friends, and welcome to this edition of Art and Coffee, the video series dedicated to helping you find and forge your own unique voice in the realms of art and visual storytelling. As always, this is yours truly, Gabe Dunston, and thank you so much for joining me today. I hope I keep good company for you while you're at the drawing board telling your own stories. Today's coffee is the Gradient blend from Counterculture Coffee Roasters. Colombia is one of our favorite origins to source fresh, high-quality coffees from small-scale farmers with diverse landscapes and a climate that supports year-round harvesting. For our dark roast gradient, we use 100% Colombian coffees and roast them to create a syrupy-bodied coffee with notes of dark chocolate, roasted nuts, and berry. I think this is new, or at least it's new on the shelves for me. It's not so bad. I mean, I'll drink it. It's definitely one of my counterculture go-to beans. Still not as good as the 46, not as good as Hologram. My wife, actually, she had this. She said that she liked it, but she definitely preferred the blend I mentioned last episode over this one. But hey, if you want a dark coffee from Counterculture, Gradient. Anyway, enough about the stupid coffee. Let's get into today's episode, today's topic, the great grand question for today. Am I too old to be an artist? Or am I too old to be a professional artist? Or is it too late for me to get started? Do I still have a chance at really making something out of an art life? That's all variations on a theme that boil down to, am I too old? Is it too late? And now, the answer, my friends, is true no matter how old you are. And the short answer is no. The long answer is no. You are not too old to start. You are not too old to be an artist. And I hasten to add, I am not speaking in a happy-go-lucky, everyone's a beautiful rainbow and has a perfect flower in their heart. Not at all. Pragmatically, you are not too old to pursue being an artist as a serious life pursuit, as a serious hobby, or if you want to be a professional, you want to make art your life, it's not too late for you. You can do it. It is a skill that you can learn and build on. And it's one of those skills that comes with time and practice and practice and practice. And it's not too late for you. Now, I've got this question from people who are older than me. At the time of this recording, I'm 35. But I've been getting this question from older people since I was 25. And the way it looks from the outside, you see somebody who's got just killer artwork, and you think they were born with a pencil in their hand. They were born understanding color, and I'm never going to get there. And that's not true. Almost every artist I've ever met spent a lot of years sucking, and I don't mean one of those because they're some kind of crazy perfectionist savant prodigy. They thought they were sucking, but the rest of us thought it was pretty good. No, I mean terrible, terrible artists with terrible, terrible artwork. That's how almost all of us began. And you don't have to be one of those treasured few, precious few who has some modicum of natural talent. You don't need it. Natural talent in professional artists is extremely, extremely rare. I've only ever personally seen it once in my life. I've only ever met one artist who was a natural talent and began his living almost straight out of high school. This particular guy did end up going to a 4-year university and doing more art there, and on to have a successful artistic career as a working artist, doing things like concept art and production art for video games mostly. That's the only person I've ever met personally, and after being an artist for more than 10 years and going to Comic-Cons and whatnot, you meet a lot of people, and you see a lot of people at various points on their journey. And almost every artist that I deeply respect and whose artwork I find very inspiring, I will look up their early stuff and yow, they were not good. So if you look at an artist who is very good, what you're looking at is the tip of the iceberg. You're not seeing the time and the effort that it took for them to get there. You're not seeing, like, 999 times out of 1,000, you are not seeing a natural talent. And so if you are not a natural talent, that's okay. That's not a prerequisite. It is not too late for you to start. It's a skill, and it's a skill you can build, and you can start building it today. You can start building it right now. You can do it with a ballpoint pen and a sticky note. And again, I am not being, I'm not looking at the world through rose-colored glasses and being like, of course, anyone can do anything. Absolutely not. That, from a very real, cold, calculating, logical, pragmatic place, you can get started right now with a ballpoint pen and a sticky note. The same way that if you want to become some kind of bodybuilder, powerlifter, or some measure of athlete, you can begin right now with just push-ups, sit-ups, bodyweight squats. You know, it's a place to start, and it's never going to steer you wrong. Now, that's not to say that if you are older and you're just beginning your journey as an artist, it's not to say that you don't have challenges in front of you. That's not to say that you don't have a series of disadvantages. And the disadvantages are pretty obvious to most people when they're staring down the barrel of actually pursuing art as a serious thing. However, if you are older, you also have a series of advantages that you may not know you already have. And I'd like to lay them out for you. And I want to be clear about who I'm speaking to right now. Because I've heard young and old say, I think I may be too old. I've heard kids who are 22, 24 think, it's too late. It's too late. I'm already too old. Laughable. Positively laughable. You're not 24. You're not too old. I know you feel old when you're that age, especially when you see people who are your age who've already been making art for so many years, and it just looks so incredible to your eyes. But 24, you've got so much time. If you're in that age range, I want you to know that this episode, it's for you. It could help you, and I want you to listen to it. But you're not who I'm talking to today. I want to talk to people who are in their 50s. That's who this is directed at. 50s and 60s. You are not too old. And if you are younger than your 50s and 60s, then you're double not too old, and count your blessings. If you're in your 50s and 60s, you're not too old. I would argue that in your 70s and 80s, you're not too old either. You could absolutely give it a shot. But in your 50s and 60s, it's definitely not too late. Not at all. So, I'm a bad news first kind of guy. Let's go in that direction. If you are an older person, or you think of yourself as an older person, and you're going into artwork and you're worried, your worries are not without merit. You do have disadvantages. The art world is a very different place right now. There are so many more apps and programs for making the art that are kind of ubiquitous, that are kind of industry standards, depending on what manner of art you're going into, illustration, animation, whatnot. You have to learn them. And there's a lot. It's a lot to learn. That's a steep learning curve, and it sucks. You don't have to learn them all at once. You don't have to become an expert on each and every one of them. You don't even have to be an expert necessarily in any one of them. You just need to have a working knowledge. And you get to choose how much you interact with certain bits of technology. And I'll go into that later. And I'm speaking of programs like Photoshop or Illustrator or Clip Studio Paint, I believe is what Manga Studio calls itself now. And then there are free alternatives, freeware, open source alternatives to these programs that you can download from the internet. GIF. When I was in college, GIF was the big one. If you wanted to make art but didn't want to touch Photoshop. Scribus is for people who want to do layouts for text. Think newsletters, magazines. You can even stretch that into posters if you like. But those are just two examples. Do a Google search. So, that's one disadvantage. There's a lot to learn. You have to understand the programs that make or clean up art digitally, and you have to understand digital distribution, which is another fancy way of saying social media. And social media, I want you to understand, most of the older people I speak to do not speak the social media language very, very well, or don't understand it completely. And that's fine, and I have a dirty secret for you. Most adults don't. And a lot of kids don't either, because social media is changing all the time. The big difference between my generation and the generations that came before me is the generations that came before me, the future was 5, 10, 15, and 20 years away. For my generation and every generation behind me, the future is 18 months away, maximum. 18 months, the game changes. Every 18 months, thereabouts, some social media changes its terms of service policy or changes its magical algorithm, or a new one appears, or an old one dies, or a new one dies, and an old one gets so much more pervasive. That landscape is always changing. And I know that it's hard if you're going from 0 to fluent in Instagram. Yeah, steep learning curve sucks, but it's okay. You can figure it out. And when you get in there and you start figuring it out and everything changes, don't worry. That's not actually a disadvantage, because it changed for all of us, the young and the old, and we all have to figure it out. And we all have to learn on the fly. It's just how life is now. And it does sound so awful, like so much extra work. And when I've talked to people who are older than me, when I talk to people my parents' age who want to be artists and need to learn this language, it sounds like just so much garbage, and they just don't feel like dealing with it. But, my friends, this particular bit of garbage, the way that you distribute your art across the internet now, the social media aspect, it's wonderful that it's here, because it gives you the capability of building all of the clout and all of the fans and followers that previously a publisher or other gatekeepers would decide whether or not you deserve. And the publishers and gatekeepers have gotten it so very wrong so many times that art consumers much prefer the social media distribution now, because it's much more, at this exact moment, it's much more from the ground up. It's coming from individuals liking things, clicking the like button, and showing their support. If you want to get published and you do want that kind of backing from what we're now calling the old world media, getting the clout and whatnot from social media, they check your numbers, and that's one of the ways that they decide whether or not to take you on. Also, because of social media, because of the digital means by which you can improve your artwork and distribute it, those publishers have become more meaningless than ever. You could do it on your own. You can control everything the way that you always wanted to. The way that so many artists have wanted to, from Bill Watterson on down. And for those of you who don't know, Bill Watterson, the writer-artist for the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, having creator control over his material was extremely important to him. And it was only because he had such grassroots popularity that he was able to wield the power of his own decisions over the syndicate that was publishing him. And so now that grassroots method is the only method, and that's in short what the digital distribution and social media does for you as an artist. Now, if you are an older person who is getting into art, you have incredible advantages over your younger counterparts. You have infinitely more focus, and that cannot be overstated. The thing that makes you better at any art form, be it music, visual art, performance art of any kind, the number one thing that changes things is deliberate practice. Deliberate practice, where you are actively working on something that you're weak at to get stronger. In music, like if you're terrible at your chord progressions, but you're very good at your scales. So many younger students think, I'm good at scales, and then practice scales over and over and over and over and over. Whereas the older music students think, I'm terrible at chord progressions, and start putting that same effort and focus into the chord progressions. And as a result, the older student improves despite having less energy and having the disadvantages of being older, less energy, usually less time. They improve so much faster than younger musicians because they have the maturity and the focus to put concerted, concentrated practice into one given area at a time. In other words, to get things done. The older person has so much more experience in actually getting things done and understanding the amount of focus that requires and having that focus. Not having your focus split by, usually, not having that focus split by the things that younger people have their focus split by. For instance, if you're older and you're married and you've got kids, you're not out there dating. You're not spending your time on dating apps. You're not going out every weekend trying to meet somebody. That part of your life is taken care of. And in fact, that's a double advantage because now chances are you've got a spouse who's backing you up, who can help you out, who can give you moral support. And that's huge because when you're a young person, you're filled with an uncertainty. And the uncertainty takes energy too, and it takes focus away. And when you don't have somebody that you love in your corner, that uncertainty is magnified by a factor of at least 2. Therefore, you, the older artist, have got infinitely more focus than your younger counterpart. So while you may be starting later, your improvement can be much, much faster. Now, if you are like me, and you want to tell your own stories, you've got your own ideas, you've got your own things that you want to do, you have an incredible, mind-blowing advantage over your younger counterparts. You have lived. You've lived longer. You may have had an interesting life. You may have had a very humble and simple life. But if you were paying attention, you've learned so much. You've met so many people, you've had real life experiences, and that's where stories come from. You have the well and wealth of knowledge and experience that your younger counterpart just doesn't and hasn't had a chance at yet. And so many younger bohemians who come from money and can go backpacking across Europe and can spend 3 months learning how to throw a pot just to figure it out. It's so easy to look at these characters and think that you are at a disadvantage in terms of your life experience as well. You are not. That is not the case. Not the case at all. Your life experience is 100% as valid as everybody else's, and being older, you have more of it. And being older, you have something to say. And being older, you have usually a much better, more curated knowledge of what is valuable to say and what is not. That's why, for instance, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the show by Fred Rogers, was such a big deal because Fred Rogers, who was making this show in the neighborhood, he began in the neighborhood of middle age. He had the focus. He knows exactly what his message is, and he focused hard on that message, the message that you're all right and emotions are okay, and here's how you process your emotions, and a lot of self-compassion. Those were his message, and he got the necessity for this message from his own life experiences, things that just, if he had begun a TV show in his 20s, I dare say it would have been far clumsier, and his impact would have been far more diluted, and he would not be the vaunted, lauded character that we so much adore today. So, with your life experience, you have so much more chance to say something so much more refined and meaningful. You also have, from your life experience, a better, more reasonable chance of managing expectations. And it's possible that your life, because you have more emotional security, You can regulate your own emotions better. You can understand your own emotional landscape, your own emotional volatility. And speaking of focus, man, when you're a younger person and you're still learning these things across your late teens, your early 20s, your mid 20s, sometimes into your 30s, when you're still learning these things, that's a huge sap of energy and focus. And when you're older and you have more resolution over these things, they may not be completely resolved, and that's fine, but you have more resolution over them, more experience dealing with yourself and your emotional landscape, more experience managing your expectations. That puts so much more energy back in your pocket, and that puts so much more focus back in your pocket and gives you another huge advantage over your younger counterpart. I was listening to an actor whose name I cannot remember. He's been a working actor in Hollywood for something in the neighborhood of 30 years. And we don't know his name because he's a working actor. He'll do any old job that pays. Most of us are familiar with TV actors and movie actors, but there's also people who do voiceover for commercials, voiceover for cartoons, voices for books on tape, who also work in small community theaters, who also work in like corporate videos and instructional videos and that sort of thing. And also the tiny little indie movies that you don't really see unless you go to the film festival circuit and so on. It's possible to be a working actor and have a long career of it without ever truly being known. And I was watching an interview with one of these guys, and he is one of the people who came to Hollywood in his 20s, and he's the last of his friends to stay in that town and to stay a working actor. And so when somebody asked him why and how, it's because emotionally he was just more, he understood himself better, and he was more reasonably able to regulate his own emotions. And the people around him were just a little bit more volatile than he was, and they couldn't keep the even keel. And that was his one advantage. He said that he came to Hollywood with a bunch of his actor buddies from a bunch of different community theaters, and that in terms of talent pool, he was at the shallow end of this group of individuals. But the one thing he had going for himself was he had his head on his shoulders a little bit more level than everybody else. That's it. And it occurred to me that the visual art world, whether you're into painting or sculpture, or myself, you're into comics and illustration and animation, when you enter an art field, you're surrounded by talent everywhere. Super talented people. And no matter how big you are, there's always somebody bigger. No matter how strong you are, there's always somebody stronger. No matter how good you are, there's always somebody better. And when you finally enter into this world and you see those things, the bigger, the stronger, the faster, the better, just right in front of your face, then it becomes a psychological game. It becomes a psychological game to just keep yourself in the game and to stay focused and to stay focused on your own improvement. And that is where you, older artists, have a huge advantage because you have so much more experience getting your head level. And you have so much more experience staying focused on what you need to do right here and right now. And you also have a much lower tolerance for nonsense. And a much lower tolerance for the things that you don't understand. For instance, that's a great filter for how to deal with social media. If there's a social media platform that appears, and so many artists don't understand it, but it's a social media platform, so I better get on it. And then they waste a lot of time on a thing that they never really understand how to operate. So again, low tolerance for nonsense puts more time and focus back in your pocket that your younger counterpart doesn't have. Now, I'd like to end with a bit of advice and a little bit of a story. If you've got something you want to do, you've got something you want to say, then do it and say it. There's never a good time. And the only time you've got is the time that's right now, this instant. And this is a holdover from my last video. When's it a good time to start your art? Right effing now. Because right now is all you've got. It's too late to go back into the past. We don't have the technology. And waiting for an ideal time in the future means you'll wait forever because there's no such thing as an ideal time. And here's an example that absolutely breaks my heart. In 2006, I was approached by an older man who had this idea for a kid's book. And he's had the idea in his head for something like 10 years. And he finally wrote it down. And he wanted me to illustrate it for him. And we negotiated, and I sent some sketches, and at the end of the day, I wasn't the artist for him. And that's fine, and I understand it. And he had difficulty finding who the artist was for him. He had specific tastes, and all of that is fine. It was 10 years before he found an artist that he kinda liked. Not ideal, but good enough. And got the book made. In just a handful of copies for himself. And now his plan was to get it published by somebody else and let the publishing industry handle the business aspect for him. And there's problems with that approach, but I'm going to focus on the man himself. It took 10 years. Like 2006 is when he had the idea finally drawn. And it was in the neighborhood of 2015, 2016, before he actually got it illustrated. If he had picked up his pencil in 2006 by himself, and this is a man who's 68, he's retired, he's got the time, and he's like he has a good pension. He's part of the generation that gets to have pensions. My generation doesn't have that, but I digress. He's got a great pension. He's got a great standard of living. Everything's taken care of. He's retired. If he picked up his pencil and said, I'm going to be the artist that I want for this book, then at the end of those 10 years, he could have been. It took him 10 years to get the book drawn, and he could have done it himself. Every pursuit of value, specifically the arts, you may have heard the 10,000 hour rule. It applies. 10 years. In the neighborhood of 10 years of specific, deliberate practice at any given discipline, 10 years, that's when you're in expert territory. And so he could have done it himself, but he never picked up the pencil. So the 10 years just went by, and now he's got a book that's on his own shelf and not in the world. And while the illustrator he got was very good. She did a lovely job. It's a very attractive looking book, but it's not his ideal. It's not perfect. It's not what he completely had in his mind. And he could have just picked up the pencil and done it himself. The 10 years went by. The 10 years are always going to go by. Time doesn't stop marching. He could have picked up the pencil. He could have begun marching with the time instead of letting it pass him. That's the number one cautionary tale that I want to send to everybody. 10 years is when expertise gets in. And if you're older and you've got the focus, you might even be able to shorten that time a little bit. And now remember, 10 years is the expertise zone. In the neighborhood of 2 or 3 years, most artists hit a stride where they start feeling like they kind of know what they're doing. In the neighborhood of 5, 6, and 7 years is when a new stride is hit, where it's like, oh, I get it now. He could have had an expert level of professional competence, but he just never picked up his pencil. What's more, he never Googled how publishers want you to submit to them, and publishers 100% hate it when a writer finds their own illustrator outside of themselves, puts themselves together, and sends that to a book publisher. Publishers hate that. If you're just a writer, they want your manuscript, and they'll pair you with an illustrator. They want to be in control of that. And it boggles my mind. It's just one Google search away to learn this information. Which is to say, my advice for everybody is to, for God's sakes, if you want to pursue art, stay curious and constantly learn. But that's not a good place to leave it on a final note. Here's the final note. You're not too old. And even if you think you are, the time is going to pass, whether or not you actually start drawing. And I'll tell you something else. I was an upset, depressed young man constantly waiting to quote-unquote start my life. And I felt very low and like nothing was going right. And then one day I just got fed up, bought some El Cheapo art supplies, and got started drawing a comic page. Just got started. And the very next day I was a new man. Just because I had begun. Because I was finally doing the thing that I said I wanted to do. And if you've got a thing that you want to do, and you're letting all of the naysaying inside of your head, I'm not good enough, I'm not actually that talented, I'm not talented at all, I'm too old. Don't listen to that naysaying. You have what it takes. Being older comes with its disadvantages, true, but it comes with advantages. And if you've got that thought that you want to make art, you want to be an artist, I'm telling you, that's not going to go away. And ignoring it is how you hurt yourself. When I was doing conventions more regularly, the number one interaction I had was, I used to be an artist, or I always wanted to draw, but I never pursued it, or I put my pencil down, and I really wish that I never had. The regret, it's real. Don't let that be you. It doesn't have to be you. And the sooner you pick up your pencil, the sooner you pick up that ballpoint pen and that wad of sticky notes, which, by the way, that's how certain cartoon shows are actually storyboarded. Professionals still use those specific tools. The instant you start moving your pen and pencil around and giving this a real shot is the instant that you stop regretting and the instant that you start doing. And if you keep doing it, and you keep doing it not even for that long, but if you keep doing it and you keep doing it on purpose, one day you can say of yourself, I am an artist, and realize that you're not lying to yourself, and you're not lying to whoever you're talking to. It's real. I make art. I make it on a regular basis. I do it on purpose. I am an artist. And if you have the desire to say that of yourself, the desire's not going to go away. You can decide how committed to being an artist you want to be. That's fine. And there's many different levels. But the impulse to say that you're an artist and have those words be real, that's not going away. So, final encouragement, final word. No, you are not too old. And the years are going to pass whether or not you pick up your pencil anyway. So pick it up. Don't let them pass. Do something with them. Thanks so much for listening. Take care of yourself, take care of your friends, and make art.